Well, it's 6 o'clock, so we will start our program. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nation and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. My name is Rashid Ahmed. I am the outreach coordinator of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at, Saskatoon. I would like to welcome all of you today in the panel discussion on the topic, Where is God in the Pandemic Suffering? Before we will start our program formally, and I will pass it down to the moderator for tonight's program, I would like to remind a couple of things which are housekeeping items. So our program will be live on YouTube channel of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat Saskatoon YouTube channel. Anyone who would like to send a message to any panelist member can send us a message on our phone number, which is 306-715-1531, or they can send us message on our YouTube channel under the chat area. And we will ask those questions later on in the question and answer session. Now, I would like to pass it down to the moderator of today's event, Wajahat Ahmed. Wajahat Ahmed is the local outreach coordinator of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, Saskatoon chapter.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings of Allah Ta'ala be upon you all. We will begin the World Religious Conference with the topic of Where is God during the pandemic suffering, with the recitation and the translation of the Holy Quran. For that, I would like to request Sharif Ahmed to please come and recite.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of Allah the Almighty be upon you all. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Now I will present the English translations of the verses just recited. These verses have been taken from the Holy Quran, chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, the gracious, the merciful, Master of the day of judgment. The alone do we worship, and the alone do we implore for help. Guide us on the right path, the path of those on whom thou hast bestowed thy blessings, those who have not incurred thy displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Sharaf Ahmed Saab. To start off the event, I'd like to invite our respected local missionary, Shakur Ahmed Baloch Saab, for a few words of the opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be upon you all. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. I would like to thank all of you for attending tonight's event organized by Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at, Saskatoon. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is an international revival movement of Islam started in 1889 and spans over 200 countries. It was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, may God be pleased with him, who claimed to be the long-awaited Messiah foretold by all major religions of the world. Ahmad did not bring a new teaching, but rather came to reinstate the teaching of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him. Over a century ago, Ahmad advocated that the jihad of the sword has no place in Islam and emphatically declared that now is the time for jihad for the pen, or defending Islam through education. Since his demise, the community has been led by spiritual successorship, or we call it Khilafat. The current and fifth successor, His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, resides in the United Kingdom, the international headquarters of the community. His Holiness has traveled extensively, urging the world and its leader to recognize their creator and to put aside vested interest to promote global peace. He has repeatedly and categorically condemned heinous acts that are done in the name of Islam by radical organizations. His Holiness leads millions of Ahmadi Muslims across the world in promoting the true peaceful teaching of Islam. Through his leadership, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is at the forefront of serving humanity by opening secular schools, hospitals, assisting orphans, providing access to clean water and energy, among many other humanitarian causes across the world with its auxiliary organization called Humanity First. The mission of our community, our Jamaat, is simple, that is to spread the true message of Islam in word and deed, and to bring about peace and harmony on our campus, on our city, on our nation, on our country, and across the world. And our motto is love for all, hatred for none. Thank you.
Jazakallah Rabbi Saab. I'd like to now introduce the different speakers we have for tonight's event. Representing Christianity, we have Mr. Josh Wallace. He is a pastor and educator here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6. He serves as Church Engagement Minister for Mennonite Church, Saskatchewan. Representing Hinduism, we have Ms. Leela Sharma. Leela is called a leader and role model within her temple community, as well as her local Indian community. She often mentors young women who are much like her when she arrived to Canada. From guidance on financial matter to advice on becoming independent and self-sufficient to gentle encouragement on cultural norms, Leela goes over and above with everyone she meets. Leela shares what she has learned about adapting to life in Canada, how to build community, and how to lend a helping hand, not only setting a strong example, but by teaching others to do the same. Joining her for the question and answer session is Dr. Naval Kishore Sharma, who is the faith leader for the Hindu Society at the University of Saskatchewan. We also have, representing Baha'i community, is Mr. Doug Gray. He is a retired businessman in the construction trade. He has worked in community development in Baha'i communities in Pikanani First Nation and in Guyana, and has been in the Saskatoon Baha'i community for over 26 years. Representing Sikhism is Amandeep Singh. He is a very active member and a volunteer of the Sikh community and a long friend of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community as well. Representing the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at is missionary Umair Khan. He spent his adolescent years in Calgary, and after graduating high school, he attended the Jama'at Ahmadiyya School, which is a missionary training school out in Toronto. After graduating the 7-year program, he had the opportunity to serve in Sierra Leone, Jamaica, and is currently serving in the BC Mosque. So welcome everybody to our event. We have given each speaker about 10 minutes to present on this topic. After 10 minutes, if you do go a couple minutes over, it's fine. We do have a little bit more time, but I will give you guys a second of warning if you do go too much over. And after each speaker gets 10 minutes to speak, we'll have about 20 minutes of question and answers. And as Rashid mentioned in the beginning, there's 2 ways that the audience can submit their questions. One way is by texting at the phone number 306-715-1531, or you can also type it in the YouTube comments or chat section as well. So to begin the event, our first speaker is going to be Mr. Josh Wallace, representing Christianity.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by naming my thanks to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at of Saskatoon for bringing us together for this conversation. This last year has been unique, and while many of us have probably walked through hardship before, the scope and the character of pandemic have pressed on our lives in new and I think often painful ways. This is a real question about pandemic suffering. I'd also want to thank my fellow panelists and speakers for making this a rich conversation. I think it's a joyful thing for us to come together, each from the heart of our traditions, and to share together, looking to God and looking to bear one another up in the midst of tough times. And I also want to thank you as well, everyone who's made space to dial in and take part in this conversation. I'm very grateful. Maybe 6 weeks into this pandemic here in Saskatchewan, I was called to a hospital bedside. A dear sister in the congregation where I pastored, an elder and a saint well into her 90s, was dying, and she asked that I come to pray with her. I was thankful that the health region protocols had just opened for clergy to be allowed in hospital for compassionate care visits. Entering the hospital, though, was different from the many visits that I'd made before COVID-19. I was temperature checked, double masked, gowned, thoroughly hand sanitized. I found my way to this elderly woman's room. I pulled a chair close enough for her to hear me, even while I was trying to mind the 2-meter protocol there for COVID-19. She was there because she was dying. Her 90 plus years had worn down her heart. It made her breathing difficult, made her living full of pain, wearied her mind, and her time was close. In the swirl of coronavirus concerns, the steady trickle of news updates and worry, that small community where the hospital was had itself been the site of an outbreak just a few weeks earlier. In this storm and anxiety, this woman's mind wasn't on the virus. I mean, yes, she was aware of it, and she understood why I was wearing a mask. Yes, she was worried for her children and her grandchildren and the rest of her community. But when I asked her what we should pray for, that wasn't what she answered. Even as tears leaked on her cheeks, she didn't name her own pain. Though she knew the end was close, she didn't worry over or try to delay death. She didn't ask for healing, for more time, or for easier times to live in. What she wanted to pray was thanksgiving. Through tears, through pain, her heart overflowed because she knew her God was near. She was thankful that Jesus was close beside her and that Jesus reminded her that God stayed close to her even when she was shut away, dying in hospital in a pandemic. God was near, she felt. Full of pain, she returned to the simple prayer, "Our Father." And these words reassured her of God's nearness, of God's tenderness. This is the voice that I bring from the wide Christian tradition. Where is God in the midst of all the suffering caused by COVID-19? Well, the Christian tradition, looking to Jesus, who shows us the presence and the heart of God, says that God is here, close, suffering with us, at times working healing, at times struggling for breath or feeling isolated, abandoned, alone with us, suffering with us all the way through. I'll come back to this in a moment. Now, mine is certainly not the only Christian voice out there interpreting what God's up to in this pandemic. I mean, if you're tuned into Twitter or watch what Christian folks post and repost on social media, you've no doubt witnessed all sorts of Christian takes on what God is doing in pandemic. So many interpretations, so many hot takes. I've heard some say that this is God's judgment on some particular sin, and it's usually related to gender or sexuality, or sometimes related to our desecration of creation and the climate. I've heard others say that this pandemic is a test of faith, a God-sent opportunity for spiritual growth or perhaps proselytizing. And then yet others, usually echoing some far-right pundit, say that pandemic itself is a lie, a deception of the devil that true believers must not give into, must not let themselves be sucked into these health protocols. And others, they invoke spiritual warfare against a demonic source of this plague. And still others say that, oh, this is just the sort of thing that happens to people, and what would you expect God to do about it anyway? The claim that runs deep beneath these many Christian voices is that God's heart, God's actions should be seen through the life of the first century Jewish peasant Jesus of Nazareth. An early letter collected in the Christian New Testament, it puts it this way. It says, "It is the same God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' who is shown in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus." A little later in that same letter, 2 Corinthians, we hear that the Christians whom the writer is addressing, at one point, they reasoned their way through the world, made sense of things like pandemics, and they had their share of them, according to the same logic of everyone else. You know, what's the bottom line? What makes sense in the push and pull of the economy and of social commitments and of status? What is dictated by protocol? But then the author jumps in and says, no longer. From now on, they are to view everything according to the heart of God, put on display in the living and especially in the suffering and dying of Jesus. So what do we see if we view this pandemic through the living and the dying and the living again of Jesus? And this lens is Christianity's great story, the place where Christians say they meet God. In the life of Jesus, as told by John the Evangelist, we're introduced to this man Jesus with these words. The Gospel of John says, God's wisdom and power, God's voice and presence became flesh and blood and made his home among us. So now we've seen his glory like that of a father's only son. But then what sort of flesh, what sort of living and dying could put on display the person of God? Well, Christians like my dying sister in the hospital, they see God so near because in this Jesus, well, God runs right up to our most hurting places, our deepest wounds, our shame, our weaknesses, our failures, and our doubts. What stories do we hear about this Jesus? He was found almost always with the sick, with folks who are hurting, the cast out. And he famously said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've come for their sake. He's found bringing honor back to those others had written off as lost, sharing food with those who don't have enough to eat, touching and healing those with all sorts of illnesses and diseases and viruses. And the story goes on. And Christians find this God close to our suffering, most of all in Jesus' own dying, as just one of many folks unjustly arrested and tortured and lied about and finally put to death on a Roman cross. That's where God is. This is also where we see the life of the world, where we see the seed of healing and hope planted. Here, where the tortured corpse of Jesus is laid in a tomb. It's from here that Christians see life spring up for all the world in that moment when God raises Jesus up to new life on the third day. This is healing of wounds, the righting of wrongs, the life from the dead that many Christians will celebrate in 8 days at the Feast of Easter. So my sister dying in a small town hospital, or my friend who shows up for Sunday worship on Zoom, who's going through long COVID, or sisters and brothers battling for breath beneath the weight of compounded pandemics, COVID and white supremacy, or COVID and settler colonialism. Christians whose incomes have disappeared or who face exposure and anxiety day to day on the front lines. We find God in pandemic suffering here. God here with our hurt. God has cast God's lot with all the suffering of the human race, with all the suffering of this planet, the universe. We find strength in the suffering of God, comfort in this compassion of God. As a Christian in this pandemic, I look again to the face of Jesus, and I see in him the God who stays with me, to see me through the hurt, even through death, to life, to society, all things made new. That's where we see God in suffering and pandemic. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Wallace. That was right on time, 10 minutes. Appreciate that. Next up is Hinduism, and I'd like to request Ms. Leela Sharma to present her.
There you go. Namaste, everyone. Before we start, we'll have a prayer, and Dr. Sharma will do that.
Hello, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing such a wonderful program, which is so timely. So I'll start with the very popular Hindu prayer, which is universal. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayah, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May all become happy. May none fall ill. May all see auspiciousness everywhere. May none ever feel sorrow. Om, peace, peace, peace.
Namaste, dear friends. Pandemic isolation is such a unique experience which we are going through right now, which has affected every aspect of our life, and almost everyone has affected in one way or other. My heart goes out to those who have lost their dear ones, those who are grieving and suffering physically and emotionally, those who are going through the financial problem, student whose education is compromised, grandparents like us who are missing the hug from their grandchildren, children who are missing their own parents. The place of worship is restricted, social gatherings has stopped. We miss celebrating functions which are main religious events. Holi festival, which is a festival of color, which happens to be tomorrow. Happy Holi to everyone. This event we would not be able to celebrate. Normally, we have color on each other's face, a symbol of love and celebration, of victory, of good over evil. The weekly services at the temple are very restricted. Interaction with the community members, friends, and loved ones is only through the telephone, FaceTime, or Zoom. In addition to all that, we are facing significant financial problems to meet our financial obligations. Paying the bill, mortgage, and other expenses, too many difficulty and problems created by this pandemic. No wonder many of us feel depressed, hopeless, and in great despair. So in the middle of last March, we celebrated Holy Function, which is tomorrow, with a lot of enthusiasm. All the students from the University of Saskatchewan, family, friends, and the whole community were at the temple. Many food dishes were prepared. Everybody was having a great time. And all of a sudden, the news of pandemic starts coming. And we had to make decision to close the temple. I was totally confused. What was really happening? The hardest part was to make poster and post outside the temple doors saying, close until further notice. I was very heartbroken. Services has been canceled at Sri Lakshmi Narayan Temple in Saskatoon. Many universal prayers were offered by Zoom. Our children taught us how to operate the Zoom because Zoom was new at that time and help us downloading the app. It taken us a little bit of time to learn how to run the program with the mute and unmute and so on. The Hindu festivals such as Ganesh Chaturthi, Navratri, Ram Navami, Hanuman Jayanti, and various other festivals celebrated on the Zoom. Despite all this, I believe there is a God. As a president of Hindu Society of Saskatchewan and the leader of the community, it was quite overwhelming for me. I was so worried about the situation. I was not sure how to manage all this, to approach the community, reach members with a physical disability, to help our senior citizens, and how to keep engaged the community in religious activity. The temple just built a new hall called Gita Bhavan. The monthly mortgage payment, utility bills, insurance, and all those expenses has to be taken care of without any income. One day, I was planning in my own mind how we should go about it, what step to take, and completely worried. The phone rang, and this young dentist asked me where to e-transfer the money. That she e-transferred quite a bit of lump sum fund to the temple account. After the few more phone calls came, and I was amazed that what made these people to call me, who gave them idea to send money to the temple. There is a spirit who looks after us all. Lord gives us disturbance in our life to get rid of our ego and bring humbleness. But Lord also shows us the way to overcome our hurdle. After that, we were all okay and managing the temple financially. With the God's blessing, we were able to distribute food to the families in need, help our seniors, disabled persons with groceries, send food to international students, and then many other programs. Made phone calls to most of the community members to make sure they are okay, they are not alone, and assure them for our support from the temple. Got engaged with the city and other organizations to learn how everybody else is dealing and doing things in their own community. We shared, we learned from each other, and for offering better service to the community. We updated the community by email, text, and WhatsApp, and everything else. We gathered all together many times in Zoom to pray to end to the COVID-19 pandemic. We prayed to those affected by it, as well as for the physicians, nurses, and scientists to combat the disease. It is normal human tendency that we all face suffering, whether it is illness, injury, emotion, upset, natural disaster. We ask ourselves, what is happening to us? Where is the God? We start thinking. We pray every day to Him with a full devotion. We trust God. We believe in God. Lord's supposed to help us, protect us. But situation like that, our faith in God began to shake a bit. We doubt whether there is a such thing as God. Also, our mind is not at peace. The situation is beyond our control and out of our hand. Let us think rationally with a calm mind. God has never promised us anything. He never signed any contract with us. Many great spiritual leaders and pundits all gone through enormous suffering in their lives as well. Like the life of Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, they all suffered a great deal in their lives. Without having pain, one does not appreciate the pleasure. Without bitter, there's no appreciation for the sweet. Life is never a straight journey. There are always ups and downs in everyone's life. The faith in God gives us a strength, courage to endure the suffering. God given us intelligence to find solution for the problems. Wisdom to see our own mistake, which causes the problem, and avoid such mistakes in our future. There's a God way of making us strong and wiser. Lord's power always works through us. Therefore, we must shift out of an attitude. The difficult time is the test for our endurance, courage, and intelligence. And going through such an experience will make us better human beings and make us realize that we are all vulnerable of illness and suffering. Our experience of good and bad times are same. Our aspirations are very similar. We feel connected to each other. These are important lesson is given to us no matter what name we give to the Lord. It is the same supreme power which is there. Creator, the sustainer, the destroyer of this material world. We all are part of this material world. I will end with the famous Hindu proverb, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, meaning the whole world is a big family. Also, one of the Mahatma Gandhi's saying says, our innermost prayer should be that a Hindu should be a better Hindu, a Muslim, a better Muslim, a Christian, a better Christian. I broaden my Hinduism by loving other religions than my own. All religions are true. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma, and Dr. Sharma as well, and happy Holi to both of you. Next up, we have Baha'i, Mr. Doug Gray. Before I let you speak, I just want to remind everyone that you can text for questions to 306-715-1531, or you can write them on the YouTube comment section as well too. Mr. Gray.
Well, on behalf of the Baha'i community, I'm grateful for your invitation and to hear everybody's thoughts and prayers from their own perspective. As a small disclaimer, I like to say that within the Baha'i community, I hold no standing, as there is no clergy within the Baha'i faith. So what I'm about to present are my own thoughts and understandings of the Baha'i writings and its teachings. But one of the principles of the Baha'i faith is independent investigation of the truth. So I encourage anybody who has any questions to actually investigate this for themselves, because I may be off a little bit. When I lived in Guyana and was serving the Baha'i faith down there, I made a good friend. His name was Mahmoud, and he had a story he loved to tell all the Baha'is that came from outside his country. And he would talk about his schoolhood friend that he was always visiting, who was quite well off. And he would talk about how this individual would say there is no God, that money is God, that all truth is money. Anyways, one day he went to visit his friend again, and he found his friend lying on the floor in absolute agony. And he was saying, oh God, oh God, oh God, help me, please help me. This pain is killing me. And so Mahmoud got an ambulance and took him to the hospital. And it was his appendix that was acting up. So once he was operated on and feeling better, Mahmoud went to visit him. And he asked this gentleman, so when you were in so much pain, why weren't you calling, oh money, why didn't you help me? Instead of, oh God, why don't you help me? Now, I don't know if this story was true, but the way Mahmoud talked about it, it was a wonderful story. But the point is, when things are going well, it's really easy to lose touch with our Creator. We may even slip in small ways. Maybe we say less prayers in the morning. Maybe we do less service in our respective faith because we have so many other things that require our time. Maybe we don't volunteer at the community kitchen as much as we would like. But as soon as things get difficult, we call upon God, and rightfully so, because He's our refuge. Without Him, truly, what are we? It's in Him that we put our complete trust. We, as His creation, are made up of two elements. There's the material, our physical being, the one that eventually we will put to rest. Then there's the other, the spiritual, our soul, which, when we put this body to rest, will continue throughout the worlds of God, getting more and more knowledge of Him. Now, this world is a place of hardship and difficulties in which we are given a free choice. The one thing that exists here that does not exist in the spiritual realms is free will. Here we have the choice to indulge in our material side, or we can seek the things of God. Baha'u'llah says, "Thou art even as a finely tempered sword, concealed in the darkness of its sheath, its value hidden from the artificer's knowledge. Wherefore come forth from the sheath of self and desire, that thy worth may be made resplendent and manifest unto all the world." This world is, and always will be a place of suffering, but it's also a place of great joy. He has given us the opportunity as His creation to either indulge in self and desire, to rise and show forth the beauty that He has created us to be. Things as in service, honesty, happiness, empathy, dignity, compassion. Now, nothing could really stop this pandemic from happening. As throughout time, mankind has been put through great tests, and it will continue so into the future. But it's how we handle these tests, these sufferings. We can show forth the qualities that God has placed within us. Baha'u'llah says, that which He, God, had reserved for Himself are the city of men's hearts. Everything else God has bestowed upon man. So our hearts are that fertile soil in which the image of God can spring forth, the qualities of God can spring forth. So, where is God through all these sufferings? Well, He's in our hearts. We only need to turn to Him, that He may ease the intensity of our sufferings, and that He may bestow upon us the knowledge and understanding and the purpose of suffering. Now, no matter which religion or messenger you follow, all you have to look to as an example is the lives of the messengers and prophets. Each one of them suffered ordeals beyond our imagination and ken. And why did they do this? Why did they take these great sufferings upon themselves? Because they knew the goodness, the beauty of God, and the goodness and beauty of His creation. And they had unconditional love for us. Veiled in my immemorial being and the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee Therefore, I created thee, have engraved on thee my image, and revealed to thee my beauty. Now, if we were to look at the womb of a mother as a child is developing in that womb, the child is developing eyes and arms, fingers, feet, which none of them serve a purpose within that womb. It's not till the child goes through that pain and suffering of birth and is born into this world that he has a use for his eyes, for his ears, for his hands, for his feet, for his mind. And it's the same with this world. This world is an opportunity God has given us to develop our arms and legs and our eyes for the next world. And those are the spiritual qualities he has bestowed upon us. Things, as I already mentioned, compassion, honesty, trustworthiness. This world is just a very temporary thing. As we get older, and for the older of you among us, you'll realize how quickly this life does pass by. So if we're walking through our house and we stub our toe, it hurts. And we might even cuss a little bit. But the pain eventually goes away. And we learn our lesson where we should walk. While this world is also a place of occasional pain, which give us a real chance to grow towards God. And even as that finely tempered sword that has to go through the fire, then the pounding, then more fire and more pounding, until that it reaches that stage of perfection that reflects the Maker's skill and beauty in his creation. And that how it must be with us. We must strive to be of service to humanity, to see the suffering of this pandemic, but use it as an opportunity to grow and serve and be good. And that was my timer. So I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gray, for that deep insight. Next, we have Mr. Amandeep Singh for the Sikhism religion.
Thank you, everyone. To say thanks to all the panelists and the organizers of this event, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at. Special thanks to my friend Rashid, inviting me to this lead panel discussion on the God in pandemic. I hope you are able to hear me, or should I pump up the volume or speak a little louder?
You're good.
Good, thank you. I will try to see the situation from a very different angle. Primarily, I will just give a brief introduction of what Sikhism is, if or maybe if people know already, just it will be a rejuvenation of the same thing. So Sikh means basically a seeker of the truth. Sikh Dharma has its own path, establishing an enduring connection with the divine within. Sikhs, the words itself derived from word Sisya from Sanskrit. And like all other spiritual traditions, Sikh Dharma has its lineage and legacy, guidelines, philosophies, its masters, its saints, and history. A elite history of sacrifice and service to others. Primarily, Sikh Dharma offers a down-to-earth spiritual path for everyone and for everyday people. It doesn't matter what your spiritual orientation is or what your cultural or back. Any person can do these practices to help them experience their own divinity in itself and in infinity of the whole concept. So for Sikhs, dharma is a religious and moral duty towards this society where we are living in. So it's all started with the birth of Guru Nanak, which are first masters, and we have 10 masters, and the compilation of all the couplets and saying from our masters and spiritual saints, and it consists of 1430 pages. So cutting it short, Guru Nanak, when he was young, his father told him to go and do a true business. When he went out and he saw there were 20 some uh, saints who were hungry, and he had some money, so he bought some he came home. His father asked Guru Nanak, obviously at that time his father obviously could have called Nanak, what business you did. And Guru Nanak replied that I fed 20 hungry people, sane people, and I couldn't find a better way of doing a business than that, because it gives me that satisfaction. His father. So since then, Sikh principle going around that of serving others. There are other principles. The very first is to earn your living with hard work, share back with the community, and one of the way of sharing back with the community is feeding people who are in need, or helping them in need. So I see, if we are questioning where is God in pandemic, so it's just like, if I have to resonate it with current situation. For example, if in one area of the city of Saskatoon we had a crime, so we cannot disown the whole of police. And God in itself, as per Sikhism, what our beliefs are, the basic one is, is which we work on, is resilient. All Sikhs are are believe in, which we call Panamanna and Chardi Kala. I will translate into English. Chardi Kala is staying in high spirits all the time. And wherever we see an opportunity like this, obviously it's a is it times we are going through right now of COVID. But Sikhs always see that as an opportunity, how we can serve people. Our Sikh temple on the west side, we when this COVID thing started, we had volunteers and we cook food in the temple, and people who want dry groceries, we had delivery people, and everyone was doing volunteer. We were helping them, feeding, getting them fed, and where people are asking for other stuff, like they have a smaller kids and they want their baby supplies, we were set. Now coming back to the point of Joe, we talk about the suffering. So suffering is like, it's like birth and death. It is inevitable. We see few things in our lifetime, some are beyond our lifetime. You grow crop, it give you fruit, and then the plant die, right? There are trees which have more longevity than us, but as per the Sikh faith, it is a core, one of the core belief is that anything which take birth, it has to die one day. So these sufferings gives us opportunity to help each other, because we believe God stays within us and everybody. And all the Sikh prayers are around, when we pray, we say, Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Pane Sarbadda Pala. So any Sikh prayer cannot end without with this slogan. That means, Hey Guru Nanak, may peace be rest upon everyone, and with your blessing of everyone, not only Sikhs, everyone. So there is a SWOT model of, like we say, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, which our MBA people and all the management people do learn. Sikhs are already working on that from last 500 years. We always see an opportunity where we can serve the community and we can help them. Coming down to the organized structures of religion, the core point is, does our actions resonate, or if we are practicing them or not? So if I, as a Sikh, I tell, okay, we believe that everybody is equal. We believe to help people, but in the time when somebody is in need, I'm not going to help. That doesn't resonate with my principles or my faith or my fall or which I'm following. So selfless service is the main thing which we have for the people. So the very fundamental existence of people like Chardika, resilience is the core of the Sikh principles. You ask anyone if you have a Sikh friend, how are you? He will say Chardikala. Like they're gonna just say that like in high spirits. So positiveness and and frame of mind where we always consistently look for an opportunity to help others and serve the community is at the core of the Sikh principles. The suffering itself, we have learned from our light history, where and throughout the Sikh history, we have so much of suffering, which helps us understand the pain of others too. How about like just example, a 10th master who sacrifices four sons, age 16, 14, 9, and 7, just to protect the sovereignty and practice of faith. A ninth master gave sacrificed his life to protect someone else's faith. So those are at the core that what we can do. Now, when we say where is God, when we have a structured faith which we are following, which is at the core that we have to help each other, and that's the God's path for Sikhs. So this all this suffering brings us the opportunity to find the hidden human inside us to come out and help others. And as I said before, as per Sikh faith, birth and death are inevitable. So anything which is born has to die one day. So right now we have extensive number of deaths happening due to pandemic. But I go further with that. If we're gonna start questioning everything like that, so then we have to question where was God when there was a Vietnamese war? Where was God when there was World War One, World War Two? There were sufferings. So suffering is part and parcel of life. Because if we have a uniformity of it gonna be very dangerous. It's just like we are living in a machine then that everything is just static, uniform, period. Like everybody's like look like same. We have one thing to eat, one environment. There's no change. So that will be a uniformity. So change it itself goes up and down. So we have good days, we have bad days. We have good mood in the morning, bad mood in the evening. So that's the same way we go by. Like there are sufferings which helps us shape. Same if we meet challenges, it helps us two ways. One, a person can think negatively and start to shatter. The other way is that, oh, this is a challenge. Let me try it. Let me overcome it. Let me find ways how I can overcome. So these are the all core fundamentals of Sikhism. We used to go to friendship in, but now from COVID, we are unable to do that much. We had Guru Nanak Free continuously working from last 2 years. We had one here in Saskatoon, which somehow we have to discontinue, but we are again planning to launch it again. On a weekly basis, we're going to serve people who are in need with some coffee and snacks or food or bread. So apart even from beyond the pandemic, what if I've been told by with my the faith I'm practicing that okay, you have to treat people fairly, you have to earn your living honestly, and then you have to go back to the community. So I have to find, and everyone has to find their own way of giving back to community. It's not only by food. For example, someone is lacking in their studies. If you think okay, you can help spare an hour in a month, help them. You can guide someone choosing their right career. You can help. This is Sikh religion is based on like you have to find the God in yourself by chanting the name of the Lord, practicing that meditational practices, and helping other people to find how we can help. And that's, for me, is the most fundamental duty of every human being. And for all the religious institutions, organizations, like we, if I see a Sikh temple, so why there a Sikh temple? Because we follow Sikhism. So those are the more organized um, organized structures or an organized way of helping people, because people can come to those places for worship, to get peace of mind, to practice good things. And I would say we are representing God if we have all those institutions. So talking about Sikhism, if we are representing Sikh faith and Sikh God at the time of need, those are the prime responsibilities of our own institutions to come forward and help each other. And at the same time, at individual levels, we have to come down and help each other. And we can learn from sufferings from our masters and from our own cultures if we don't want to see beyond that. And try to so that we can help. That's from me. I think my time is up. Thank you everyone for having me and listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, you can text them at 306-715-1531, or you can write them at the YouTube comment as well. We do have quite a few questions that came in, which we'll be answering after this last speaker, which is Mr. Missionary Omer Khansan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon all my brothers and sisters. I wanted to thank the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at Saskatoon for organizing this and also inviting me. I really enjoyed all the speakers. I was listening very carefully, and it was an opportunity for me to also learn more about other faiths. I'm going to start the presentation with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I will be sharing just to help so everyone could kind of follow. And I will start that right now. So, very interesting question. Where is God during the pandemic suffering? So what I've done is I've divided this presentation into two parts. One is the general question of suffering and what Islam says about that. It's a common question that many people have. So I will try my best. I will attempt to try to answer that. And then the second part, I'll try my best to answer that question. Where is God during the pandemic suffering? So I'll start off with a story, a very interesting story that sheds light on this topic. And this was narrated by a Muslim saint to shed some light on, the concept of suffering. And he gave the example of, an oil lamp, that an oil lamp had water and oil, and the water and oil had an argument. And the argument was that the oil and water, they started having this discussion, and the water addressed the oil and said, "You are heavier and dirtier than I, yet despite your thickness, you float up above me. For I am pure and refined, and I'm used for cleaning, but I still remain below you. Why is this so?" The oil responded, "You have not experienced even minutely the degree of difficulty that I have endured. It is for this reason that I have attained this lofty position. There was a time when I was sown in the earth, I remained hidden and was humbled. Then by the will of God, I began to grow and had not grown much before I was cut down. After great pain, I was then refined. Further still, I was ground in an oil press, whereafter I was transformed into oil and finally set aflame. After all this, was I not to attain a lofty position?" And this is just to shed light on this concept that Islam presents, is that suffering is a concept that God introduced to mankind, not necessarily to, out of any hatred or anything, but it's a concept to actually help people progress and advance. Because if there was no suffering, then there would be no progress and advancement. Progress would become stationary and stagnant. Another thing that suffering kind of helps with is to help recognize and appreciate joy and happiness. Because without suffering difficulties, we would not be able to appreciate joy, happiness, and these types of things. And I'll share another quote with you in a second. And another thing about suffering is that it brings out the best in a person. And I remember some of our previous speakers also touched on this. Feelings of humility and gratefulness, compassion towards others, recognition and turning towards God are some of the positive aspects that do come out of suffering. So what does the Holy Quran teach? So the Holy Quran, it gives the wisdom behind suffering as progress. And you see the verse in front of you, chapter 67, verse 3 of the Quran, in which God says, meaning God, who has created death and life, that he may try you, which of you is best in deeds, and he is the mighty, the most forgiving. So the Quran points out that the wisdom behind trials and suffering is to bring out the best in an individual, where God says that he will definitely try you, tests will come, just to see the best in deeds, the best of you to come out as an individual and also as a society. And then the Holy Quran teaches that the concept of advancing towards progress versus staying stagnant. And this is a verse that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on the bottom left, chapter 93, verse 5, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. Surely every hour that follows is a better one for thee than the one that precedes. So Islam teaches this concept of moving forward and moving to higher levels. And one of the things that helps with that is sometimes going through trials, difficulties. You could call it suffering, many different names for it, but the main purpose is to try to attain higher levels of advancements in this world, but also speaking from an Islamic perspective in spirituality, morality, and also righteousness. And this is a quotation from our late fourth spiritual leader of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. May Allah be pleased with his soul. He writes in his book, Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge, and Truth, that without the taste of suffering or an awareness of what it means, the feeling of relief and comfort would also vanish. Without an encounter with pain and misery, most certainly joy and happiness would lose all meaning. And I found this quote very, beautiful and interesting, because sometimes, when difficulties come, our mind doesn't actually go towards that angle, is that we would not actually know what joy and happiness is until we actually experienced difficulty, hardships, and trials. And another thing that's good about difficulties and trials is that the Quran teaches innama al-usri yusra, that after hardships come ease. So the Quran teaches that yes, there is suffering, there are trials, but always keep in mind that it's a temporary thing. So just stick with it, be patient, and show perseverance, and it will eventually pass. Now suffering. Now when we look at suffering, you look at a lawyer, a doctor, different professionals in different fields, right? They were not able to attain that high level of education unless and until they actually went through and experienced suffering themselves. I mean, if you talk to a medical student and his study schedule is so intense, that's the type of suffering a student puts upon himself. Why? To reach higher levels of advancement in knowledge, so eventually they're able to help people who are sick or in difficulty. But a student will not be able to attain that level until he puts himself through that difficulty, trial, and suffering of getting a higher education. Same thing with professionals. If you look at elite athletes, you look at LeBron James, Michael Jordan. As you can see, I'm a basketball fan. Those people did not reach that level of athleticism just by sitting around and maybe by luck I'll make it to the top. No, like they tried. And I remember there's an incident with Michael Jordan, and he actually got cut from his high school basketball team. And he put himself through suffering even more by working harder, practicing harder. And now we tell our kids about, Michael Jordan, he has shoes, he's the greatest. But he couldn't have reached that level until he went through some type of difficulty and trial. And if you take a careful look at scientific, medical advancements, technological advancements, all types of modern transportation, you will see that there is some level of suffering at the root of all this progress, right? When you compare life today with the time, our caveman ancestors were around, trying to figure out what the wheel could do. I mean, now we have like electric cars, but obviously there was there was some type of difficulty and hardship that pushed mankind to, you know, strive harder and further. And also suffering helps, quotation from the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, the Prophet Messiah, Islam, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, said that when a person is afflicted by some calamity or misfortune, they show immense humility and meekness. And we find that example during this pandemic, how people have opened up towards each other with love and compassion. Our Sikh brother was talking about how, you know, in their community, they've been going out, reaching out to, you know, people. And one of the reasons for this push was because we saw the suffering and the difficulty that people are going through, which we also experienced, and naturally our hearts opened up towards other communities and people. Now, coming to the last part of this presentation, where is God during the pandemic suffering? And I remember I was listening to Doug representing Baha'i, and I was like, this is so close to what, you know, Islam teaches in the Quran. And I wanted to bring your attention to this verse, chapter 39, verse 50. God says in the Quran, and when trouble touches man, he cries unto us, meaning to God. But when we bestow on him a favor from us, he says, this has been given to me on account of my knowledge. Nay, it is only a trial, but most of them know not. So God is hinting in this verse that his desire is not to actually punish people just for fun, but sometimes it's a wake-up call to people to, you know, remember God and turn back towards him. And exactly how some of our previous speakers were saying, that people tend to forget God when things are good, times are easy. But when difficulty touches them, then everybody goes running towards God. And there was this really recent incident I was watching. I'm sure some of you remember. I believe there was an airplane that left from Colorado, and one of the engines went on fire. And I was watching CNN, and the people that were interviewed, one after another, they all said something so interesting. They're like, once we saw that engine on fire, we all started praying to God. We all started praying to God. Now, I don't know if they actually believed in God before that, but definitely when difficulties come and you're face to face with, you know, death, a lot of people, whether they believe in God or not, they end up turning towards God. But what ends up happening is that when that trial goes away, people also tend to, you know, go away from God. And I found this very interesting. There's a professor at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, Jeanette Sinding Benson. She did a study and she found that Google searches for prayer rose in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And she said that it rose to the highest level ever recorded during COVID-19. So this also is very close to what the Quran was mentioning, that when trials come, people run and they go towards God. Everybody starts remembering God. But again, she also said the same thing, that like she did research that after an earthquake, she said that usually religiosity stays in people for 3 to 6 years, like after an earthquake. And then after that, they also turn away from religion and God. And that's one of the things that the Quran also teaches. So coming towards the end of my presentation, I think there's a couple more slides. And there's another verse I wanted to share with all of you, which I found very interesting, chapter 32, verse 22 of the Quran. God says, and most surely I will make them taste of the lesser punishment before the greater punishment, so that they may return to me with repentance. So God has a very deep desire for mankind to recognize him and turn towards him in righteousness and good actions, you know, being just towards and loving towards each other. So this verse is talking about how God sends lighter punishments as warning signs for people to turn back towards God, to seek forgiveness and reformation, especially when they've kind of gone off track and are going away from God. And our current caliph, he mentions that the pandemic signifies that the world is being admonished to fulfill the rights of their God and fulfill the rights of God's creations. The days of disasters and epidemics remind us to raise our commitment to God and invite the world to recognize and worship their creator. So yes, I mean, from an Islamic perspective, it's safe to say that, yeah, this may be a wake-up call from God that, you know, I exist, and, you know, you should look into turning towards me in worship and fulfilling the duties of man and towards our neighbor. So at the end, where is God during this pandemic suffering? The Quran makes it very clear that he has never left. He was always here, but it is actually we as mankind who have turned away from God. And sometimes God send these, you know, wake-up calls, I'll call them. and quick revelation of God towards the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which reflects the love and compassion God has. He was revealed from God that those who walk towards me, I will run towards you. So I wanted to end with that. I think I see some messages. Yes, I am up with my time. Thank you, and I look forward to carrying on this conversation in the question answer session. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
Jazakallah Rabbi Saab. We will now enter our question and answer session. So if you do have questions, like I said, you can message them at 306-715-1531 or write them in the YouTube comments. I do have about 5-6 questions that did come to me so far. So let's start off with the hard ones. And first question I have over here is it God's will for the world to suffer through the pandemic? So let's start off in the order that we presented. So I'll request Mr. Wallace for Christianity to start by answering that question.
Wow, that is a big question to begin with. I think if you listen to the broad Christian tradition, you will hear many different answers to that. There'll be voices that say, yes, everything that happens is according to God's will. And you will hear other voices that say, no, this is not what God wants because God's will is for life and life abundantly. I would say my tradition sees God as working, my particular Christian tradition sees God as working against suffering, as coming to meet us in the midst of our pain and to heal us and bring us to fullness of life. I think that's what we see with Jesus. And it reminds me of a story where Jesus met a man who was born blind, and his followers said, why is this person born blind? Did God want it that way? Is God punishing him for something? And Jesus says, this person was born blind. Let me show you what the glory of God looks like. And then he heals him. So that within my tradition of Christianity would say this is not something that God wants for us other than as an opportunity for healing.
Thank you for that. Ms. Sharma or Dr. Sharma, whoever'd like to answer that.
Yeah, just to, can you repeat the question? It got fuzzed on my.
Yes, for sure. The question is it God's will for the world to suffer through the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think our tradition believes that the suffering and the pleasure in this world are experiences which go hand in hand, and you cannot have one without the other. What is really important is that the God or that supreme power which resides within us, that gives us strength as to how to deal with it. And I think I'll just quote one story which may highlight the point, that this guru had 2 students with him, and he sends them, because the ancient schools were in the jungle, so he sends them to the jungle to find some food for everybody in the monastery. And they go spend all day and gather some food and try to bring it to the monastery. On the way, they meet this person who is very friendly and a stranger, and starts walking with them. Little did they know that soon after that, he robs them with all the possessions they had and runs away. It was too late for them to go back and get more food, so they go empty-handed in the ashram. And the guru, and tell the whole story to the guru. And he says, so what did you learn from this thing? So the first student says that never to trust any stranger. And he says, you haven't learned anything. The second one said that it taught me that to be prepared for something which is unforeseen, unexpected. And that's what I learned. And that's the true learning. And I think that's the same situation we have right now, to be prepared for something which is unpredictable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Mr. Gray for Baha'i.
Thank you. So God's will to suffer is true. It begs an interesting question. Is suffering actually a bad thing? Is it a negative thing? Mr. Khan mentioned about the athletes. Athletes have to suffer through periods of growth to become elite at what they do. And through that whole time, they have to suffer. But they reach the pinnacle of their profession. A woman during childbirth has to suffer greatly. But the point of that suffer is this incredible child that she delivers into this world and who she can bestow her love on and feel that child's love for her. I think another thing is the opportunities that this suffering brings upon us. Because one of the things we're not recognizing, or in a very limited way we're not recognizing, is the oneness of mankind. That no matter what your skin color is, what your cultural background is, whether you're rich or you're poor, whether you're smart or not so blessed that way, we are all one. And what we're finding through this pandemic is how divisive we can really be. So what we're being presented is the chance to advance civilization by realizing the oneness of mankind. And the other principle within the Baha'i faith, I'll lastly mention and let somebody else speak, is Baha'is believe in the harmony of science and religion. And the reason that is because without religion, science becomes unbridled. It doesn't have any place to stop, right? It doesn't have morality. So science must have the goodness of religion in it. But science is also the study of God's creation. So therefore, it's the study of God. So it's not a bad thing. Science is actually a very good thing, but most must be tempered. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Singh, can we get your thoughts on this question?
This is very interesting question, and I believe the person who asked the question, are we trying to find a way that we need someone to blame for everything? First of all. Second is, I would answer this in a way that in multi-fold way. The first way is, so if my kid goes to school and tells me that, you know what, I don't want to go to school because I feel that this is suffering for me, we still push him because we want him to go through that. And from Sikhism's perspective, if someone asks me that, oh, if I go to temple and do all the prayers, will my life will be I will be the happiest person on earth? I will say no. The happiness is within you. And the word I used before is resilient, right? So resilient is like the faith itself teaches us how to cope up with all the problems. And I believe all other faith people will resonate with this thing that our masters are humans like us. They are visionaries. They are beyond, I would say, superhumans because they have the ability to define God, right? And now what we're trying to do is, with a limited perception of our brain, we are trying to question and understand God only from the point of where is God in pandemic. To answer it very straight, because I was first making the base, in Sikhism, Guru Nanak said, "Hukme andar sabko, bahar hukum na koi." So, which Dharti pa, which Suraj pa, which Akash. The first sentence I said in native language means that everything is in God's order. So, if to answer that, yes, pandemic is God's will. Second, Guru Nanak further states in his saying that everything is under a fear of God as well and working in the perfect sync. So Earth takes the revolutions, does not so many years, and there are a lot of Earths and a lot of skies as per Guru Nanak because he can see and vision that. And from scientific, that very well explained the science part of that. I want to quote Nicholas Tesla. He used to say that he imagines everything before he do it, or he did it. And he said, everything comes to me, and I have a receptor on my head, and God sends that to me. And I will rest my case by that. I'd like to have some other guests to answer that as well. Thank you. I hope I answered.
Thank you. And lastly, we'll have Rabi Khan.
Jazakallah. So the concept that Islam teaches, like one of the attributes of God in the Quran is that he is al-wadud, meaning that he is the loving, right? So Islam presents God to be very loving, compassionate. So how I presented, the thing that I presented in my presentation was that sometimes through difficulties and trials, there's the, the hope for progress and becoming better, right? So even many who are watching or are online right now are parents. We have that relationship with our children is that sometimes we push them in their education, morals to become better. It's a type of suffering for them, but our intention is love. So after that difficulty, they become better people. At the same time, there are different types of suffering, and God has also given us free will. And sometimes we as humans also misuse that free will, which is also mentioned in the Quran. And I'll quote chapter 30, verse 42 of the Holy Quran, where Allah says, "Corruption has appeared on land and sea because of what men's hands have wrought, that he may make them taste the fruit of some of their doings, so that they may turn back from evil." So this is also another, angle to this question, is that, suffering is also caused by the misuse of the free will that God has bestowed upon mankind. So depending on who you're talking to and what kind of experience they're going through, I don't want to go into too much detail with this, but if there's more time, then we could further elaborate. But these are two different types of angles that Islam presents on this question.
Jazakallah. Many of the questions that we're getting, they're related to each other. I'll pick a question that encompasses a lot of them. It says that if suffering helps with progress, how can we differentiate if suffering is a mean of progress from God, or is it his displeasure? So basically they're asking, is that the pandemic we're going through, is it a displeasure of God, or is it a way for God to help us progress? And following the same order, we'll start with Mr. Wallace for Christianity.
I appreciate how often the story of parenting children, or the picture of parenting children, and sometimes our kids have to do things that are not fun, but are good for them. I think I could tell that story just from being home with my kids today. I think what distinguishes what kind of suffering is from God is whether the suffering ends up in bringing more life. Again, I'll go back to what Jesus said, that God wills, God wants, desires life and life abundantly. There is plenty of suffering that does not lead to life abundantly. It leads only to death. That is not the suffering that God wants. It may sometimes be the suffering that our free will and foolish actions lead us into, but it's not what God wants at the heart of God. Yeah, and I'll rest just with that simple statement and pass it along to someone else.
Thank you. Dr. Sharma for Hinduism.
Hello. The suffering is something which I'm very familiar with as a physician, and I see suffering. I have practiced medicine for nearly 40 years and have seen lots of suffering and deaths, the emotional suffering, physical suffering, and I strongly believe there is a spiritual suffering, because our human beings have three aspects of our personality: physical, mental, and spiritual. Normally, in medical science, we don't believe in spiritual aspect of it, but more I practice, more strongly I believe so. I'll just give one example of a recent death of one of our friends who was my patient as well. And just a few weeks ago, that happened. And this lady was had a great spiritual leader of our community. She had practiced all her life, all the spiritual way of her life. So her life was totally spiritual. And with that one, when she was told, or when I told her the results of her investigations, that she has terminal illness, and she did not have a whole lot of suffering on her face. She had a smile and she said, "No, you tell me exactly what happened, what is this, and how long do I have to live?" And when I told her, she was more concerned about my pain, which was showing on my face, as she being my friend. And she then tells me how many things she has to take care of it and how much time she has. She did not talk for a single time as to why did this happen to me, and what wrong did I do that I deserve this thing. And this is what the spiritual life is all about. Spiritual life and the God does not guarantee that sufferings won't come in this world. They will come. It's just that you are better prepared to handle them. And with that spiritual health, which we have by living spiritual life, is something which will help us. We'll never avoid the sufferings in this world, because this is how we perceive the world, as the pain and pleasure. And this is just the natural thing which will happen from time to time. It's not that spiritual people don't suffer, they suffer, but their attitude is different. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray for Baha'i.
Yeah, thanks. Once again, people are kind of saying the same thing, about the parent and disciplining the child and whatnot. So another aspect of this is that we all know that the Creator has unconditional love for us. Unconditional. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter who we hurt, right? There's no chains to his love. There's no subtext to his love. It's all unconditional. And if you look at suffering from an unconditional love, like you think of the word unconditional, right? If you look at suffering from that angle, then suffering is a way for us to grow as better people. It's not a bad thing. Suffering is actually a good thing, because it draws us nigh back onto our Creator. Because this world is really temporary, and suffering only exists in this world. In the spiritual worlds of God, we leave all that behind, right? And we feel that rays of the sun of the Creator shining upon our souls, our spirits. So we feel that complete unconditional love. And here it's veiled, right? We know it exists, but it can be veiled. So look at suffering as a lodestone, as a way for us to better ourselves, as a good thing, and approach it as thanking God for it, because then we can grow near to God through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Mr. Singh, your thoughts?
Thank you. So I would say this is kind of a same question resonating the earlier one, but I put it this way. First of all, the understanding of God from the human's limited ability to perceive what God is, and we just think who feels pain and who has anger and all that stuff. This the same. From Sikhism point of view, God is devoid of enmity. He has no enemy. We are not his enemies, right? And the perception from we are trying to understand making us asking the same questions and trust having having same issues of like why God is doing that. So from Sikhi point of view, I would say we shouldn't see that as a God's curse, right? If I, even for a second I remove God's perspective from the question, I would come down to what we did in pandemic. That's the real question. So if are we taking, I'm sorry to say, and my apologies to anyone if it hurts. We use a term called scapegoat. Are we trying to put God into that perspective? Okay, put blame on the God and we are done, so that we don't have to answer anything of any kind. So from Sikhism point of view, again, I come down to that. First of all, you have to increase the span of your understanding of, we are living in a three-dimensional world, and we just have the understanding of this three-dimensional world, period. To increase and go to a different dimension, you have to do meditation, and you have to follow whichever faith you are, and then you have to increase your ability to perceive and understand the laws which we do not understand at this point. And again, yes, everything goes with the God's will, but comes down to a basic thing at a community level, a country level, what we are doing in the pandemic, and how we are facing that challenge, and how we are contributing to solve that problem, instead of putting and questioning. Even if I prove that, okay, God did it for you, what next? I've created a challenge for you, what next? Are you trying to overcome the challenge, or are you just trying to find a way to escape and do a blame game or something like that, instead of is encouraging yourself to stand up for the challenges and opportunities to improve our personal growth and help the community.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Missionary Umair Khan.
Assalamu alaikum. The question is, if I remember correctly, how do you know if suffering or trial is from God to help progress or make you better, or if it is a sign of God's displeasure for that person? So when I was thinking about the answer for that, my daughter came to mind. She's 6 years old. And I remember when we were trying to teach her the Quran, it was a type of suffering that we put, I mean, she went through, she was trying to run away from it. It was really hard for her to learn the Arabic. But one thing I realized is that once she got through it, we celebrated, by giving her gifts, and we had a little program. So that type of suffering, I could see that sometimes it's from God, that He puts you through difficulties, but the end result is that you see His blessings, you see His help, and you see His favors. And then I'm going to use my daughter as an example again, but sometimes as parents, if we become upset with our children, what do? We take away those favors, right? We give them timeouts, we take away their tablets, we take away their toys. So that part shows the child that this is not to help you become a better person. Rather, this is because we are upset with your behavior or something that you did bad. And I'll link that with God's attitude towards us as His children. Him being a father figure, is that when He's trying to make the best out of us, the result of it will be that we were in a better position afterwards than before. But if God is displeased with you, one of the ways to tell is that sometimes we are in a worse or more difficult situation after that suffering or that trial. I hope that made sense. Thank you.
Jazakallah. Our time is coming near to end, so we'll do one more question. A lot of the questions that are coming are very repetitive, just different phasing. But I think this one question is a good way to end off the question answer session. Is from your respective religions, how would you advise the world to get through the pandemic? And to be fair to Josh and Dr. Sharma, let's start off with the other end of this so they have some time to think. So let's start off with the Murabi Saab, Obir Amir Khan.
Okay, so how to get through the pandemic? So I look at the pandemic as a trial, right? So about trials and difficulties, the Quran says, "O ye who believe, seek help with patience and prayer, Inna Allah ma'as sabirin, that surely Allah is with those who are patient. So one of the things my advice would be is that, stick through it, don't give up, don't lose faith. And, the technique the Quran teaches is to pray and also be patient. Another teaching that the Quran gives, and I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, is that God says in the Quran, Inna ma'al usri yusra, that surely after hardships come ease, right? So yes, definitely it's a difficult time. It's hard, it's very difficult on a lot of people. But remember that these trials come from God. It's not a permanent thing. It's usually very small with the amount of blessings that He's given us. And hopefully a lot of good ends up coming out of this. So remember, this is only temporary. Thank you.
Jazakallah. Mr. Doug Gray.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, the question is, from your respective religion, what advice would you give the world that is going through the suffering?
What advice would I give to the world through our religion? Well, once again, I'd probably raise the principle of Baha'u'llah about the oneness of mankind, but also that that governments are there to serve the people, not to rule them. So from our perspective, and once again, I would say this is my understanding of the Baha'i writings. It doesn't mean it's 100% correct, so one should investigate for themselves. But the leaders of the world should come together and find a way to mass produce this vaccine and to promote proper conduct as wearing masks and social distancing and all those things. And that first world countries shouldn't have dibs on the vaccines while our brothers and sisters in places like Africa or South America or any other what's called third world countries have to sit on the back burner because they have no money. Or places like Brazil, where their leadership is just completely kind of out in outer space and letting their populace suffer and die. So I think really what mankind or what the world should do is recognize our oneness, come together as one, and then serve all humanity to overcome this pandemic, because it won't be our last one.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Mr. Singh?
I kind of resonate with Mr. Doug. We have one organization called Khalsa Aid. Khalsa means a pure form of Sikhs, which our last master started. So Khalsa Aid does work for, and then their slogan is believe all humanity as one, all human race as one. And they have been working before even pandemic from last 20 years, like may it be India, the floods, may it be Iraq, may it be Syria, the people who are suffering. The governments are fighting, they are soldiers of their particular thing, what they're doing, but the majority of people who are suffering, provide them food, provide them water, shelter, and they're not Sikhs. Like if I have to just think about like for a very limited perspective, which is not Sikhism perspective, that okay, I only have to help my people, right? But no, Sikhism, the core belief is to help whosoever you can without considering their race, religion, caste, creed, nationality, anything. So, and that's the very core belief of Sikhs. And for the one who can advise anyone on anything, people are very smart these days and they know what's good for them or not. We have to believe in science for things, and at the same time, for your personal well-being, you have to believe in your faith. Even for the people who do not believe in God, I believe they would believe in humanity, the core, like as a human. Again, I come down to the same thing. What we did in pandemic, what I did in pandemic, what we are individual and collective effort. how we are helping people. If you know someone, oh, that person seems to be sad, pick up a phone, have them, okay, I'm here, I can listen to you. If you like talking, like when we talk about mental health, it's just about all about a connection, which is missing these days. And I think pandemic is kind of a sign that we need a human connection. We have to come out of the virtual world and then help each other, understand each other. We have to respect each other's differences. Walk along anyone, you have to find the common things, right? You talk to anyone, like, yeah, we have to help people, but at the ground, does my words resonate my actions or not? That's the core thing. And we have to come down to those things, and we have to make ourselves accountable for that. In this session, I may say 100 times, okay, we have to help people. Did I go volunteer for 2 hours in a month at least to help someone feed, to provide someone food? I was working, did I donate it to them without thinking that, okay, if this is a Sikh organization or some other organization or whatever organization, but if their job is to help people, did I contribute even $10 or $20 for that? So I come down to that, and again, do social distancing, uh, try to hold each other's hand, like not physically, but I mean in your spirit, that you try to take people with you, talk to them and help them whichever way you can. If you are not able to go out, if your friend is sick, feeling mentally, he needs some mental health, tell them to talk to someone, help them guide through the process, and then we will sail through it. It's just challenging time. One of the quote which I tell myself all the time: the tough time never lasts, the tough people do. So that's my suggestion, I would say, not advice, if people want to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Dr. Sharma.
Thank you. As I hear all the other speakers speak on the subject and various questions, one thing is very evident, that that truth is one, which is a very popular Hindu proverb. Truth is one, but it's said in different ways by wise people at different times. So our religions really teach us very similar things, what we have been talking about. Superficially, in our rituals, in our way of prayers, in our language, the way we dress up, all these things may look different, but the deeper aspect of our religion, which is spiritual, is very much the same. The question comes as to why we suffer in this pandemic isolation. And I think to analyze, because I have a scientific mind, that's what I have practiced all my life. And after reading all these scriptures and teachings and stuff and commentaries and listening various religious talks and so on, I come to the conclusion that suffering, what we're having in this pandemic, just take the pre-pandemic situation. We always had wanted free time for ourselves, so we can spend time with our loved ones. We can do things which we don't have time for, all the things which are dear to our heart. And when the time came, we very quickly realized that we ran out of all those things. And now we feel isolation. We are suffering from the isolation because we want to connect with the people. So one thing which is very evident is that there is a universal energy field, which now science is exploring in great detail. And we are all connected with this universal energy field. Carl Jung had called it collective unconsciousness. We share the intelligence collectively from this spiritual world. And it is, we can call it with different names and connect it in a different way, because this is something which is non-physical. We are trying to connect it with this thing. So why we feel so miserable, and you can see that domestic violence has increased in this time, crimes have increased, drug addiction, alcohol addiction have increased, people are more depressed, suicide, even physical illnesses have increased. But on the other hand, there are people who are doing great noble things, like the one we are participating right now, People have done great volunteer things, philanthropic things, helping each other. And the medical science is doing their job, trying to create the vaccine with great expertise and in such a short time. The lawmakers are making laws to see how we can combat with this. All these things are happening. The question comes, why a person, when he's alone, has such a suffering? What solitude creates? The solitude creates because we are all by ourselves, with ourselves. We haven't spent very much time with ourselves. So we are with our thoughts. And these thoughts, if they are positive thoughts, we create creative things, positive things. If our thoughts, our mind is filled with negative thoughts of anger and jealousy and selfishness and so on, these thoughts come out. All these from the subconscious mind, it comes to our surface, things which we have suppressed. If all these negative thoughts in our subconscious mind are there, they will come out, they will bother us, they will disturb us, they will cause the great deal of suffering. And a lot of times it makes us do things which are criminal and we get into trouble. If they are positive thoughts within our mind, they will help us do positive things. So the bottom line is the spiritual life creates positive thoughts, and the non-spiritual life, criminal life, that will create negative thoughts in our minds, and that will bother us. You are happy when you are filled with positive thoughts in your mind. You are unhappy no matter in what situation you are in with negative thoughts. So with positive thoughts, even in the tough times, you will deal much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. And finally, we have Mr. Wallace. Based off your earlier reaction, I think you kind of like going first. Huh?
I think I will bring three practices from the Christian tradition that I feel will help us move through pandemic. The first of these points to something that sustains us in our thoughts, in our individual selves, as we find ourselves often in isolation, often working through a year that's been rough. And that is, we could call it honesty. I think leading back, turning our view back to the roots of the Christian tradition in the Hebrew scriptures, we might call it lament. Finding a space to name, often in prayer, sometimes in protest to God, that this is hard, and how long is it going to be hard, and why isn't it getting better? And finding space to name that. This is what we, in fact, see Jesus doing in his moments of greatest suffering on the cross. He calls out in the voice of the Hebrew scriptures, my God, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? I think finding that honesty to say that, again, from the Christian tradition, that this suffering, which is a great wrong and evidence of the brokenness of the world, enemy to the abundance of human life, has us in its grip. Why, God? Why don't you do something? So I would encourage us individually, I would encourage folks individually to find ways to do that, and especially communally to join together. I think that's something that in the Christian tradition, we especially have learned from the African-American church in the spirituals and in the blues, like James Cone directs us. Second, we find in the Christian tradition that God comes to us in our moments of suffering and weakness and hurt, both to heal us, but also to help us grow into the image and the story of Jesus, so that then we can go to others in their suffering and in their weakness and in their hurt, and be their community and stand together with them, and if possible, to bring healing and hope. I think that's something that we do, first of all, locally. It is going out and feeding folks who are hungry. It's being part of restorative justice movements right here in Saskatoon. It's sitting and, like you said, talking with our friends, our neighbors who are experiencing mental health struggles in the midst of this isolation. I think that leads us finally to a more global and social outlook that we've heard. Doug, we heard it from you, we heard it from others. it leads us to wisdom and say, why has this wave of suffering broken upon us in this way? What are the structural reasons that have produced this suffering, or that have amplified it, or have made it hard for vaccines to get from one country to another? I've appreciated the teaching of Pope Francis on this, actually. He recently published a little book called Let Us Dream. And he says, in the midst of suffering, we must come together and dream, reason together, and look for ways to make the world better and stronger. Why? Because what God wants is abundant life. So those would be my three perspectives from the Christian tradition to get through and get better.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace, and thank you to all the speakers. I will now forward the program off to the local president of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Mr. Saeed Tanveer Ahmed, for the vote of thanks and the silent prayers.
Thank you very much, Wajahat. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon all of you. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Dear friends, it is my privilege to extend my heartfelt appreciation to all the participants of this evening's program. I'm particularly obliged to our learned speakers, Amandeep Singh from Sikh community, Leela Sharma from Hindu community, Josh Wallace from Christian community, Doug Gray from the Baha'i community, and Umair Khan from Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at. For their valuable insight to this topic at hand, their insight has painted a better picture on our understanding the concept of suffering and God. I'm also thankful to the audience who joined us here today. May Allah bless you all. Dear friends, every successful event has the countless volunteers who work behind the scene, and tonight is no exception. My heartfelt thanks to all of you. Please remember them all in your prayers. And at the end, it is a tradition to conclude our events with a silent prayer. And since we have such a diverse community presence, I encourage everyone to join in their own ways. So with that, thank you very much again, and please join me in a silent prayer. Amen. Thank you again. Bless you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. It was nice meeting you all.
It was
Thank
great.
you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.